Making realistic model roads can be a daunting task, just like making YouTube videos. Anyway, the type of road I'll be making in this video is meant to look like an older type of road that's been around for a while, without much maintenance done. So in this video I'll walk you through the process of how I made it, and I'll share with you what I've learned in the process, so you can be on the road to success making your own roads. Get it? Before doing anything, I highly recommend getting some reference photos of the type of road you want to recreate. It's easy to find photos of almost any type of road on Google, or you can take photos of a specific road in your area. But let's get started. Firstly, I planned the road using Inkscape. After printing, cutting and positioning it, I marked along the edges of the paper. Using the paper helped me to visualize how the road would appear. Although printing it like this isn't necessary, I highly recommend this step. You can even use blank paper. It's just to get a rough idea of how the road will turn out before it's too late. I created the road with plaster of Paris. In order to cast the road out of plaster, I used 2x2mm strip wood. The strip wood will be removed once the plaster has set. That's why I only use a small amount of super glue, about every 8 to 15 centimeters. And yes, these are the same baked beans I used years ago. I only use them as weights, I do not enjoy eating it. To keep the layout nice looking, I apply masking so it doesn't all get dirty with plaster. I'm not gonna do plaster in between the rails, I will use strip wood for that. Next, I mixed up some plaster of Paris. I don't recommend using old plaster cause you want a really smooth mixture. This step was really scary, but at this point I procrastinated so much that procrastinating wasn't an option anymore. Plaster of Paris doesn't give you much working time before it starts to set, so I worked in small sections at a time. And yes, I'm using a ruler for this. It works great, so why not? After 2 hours the plaster had hardened, and I removed the masking, which was quite satisfying. Any plaster that leaked out was easily removed with a hobby knife. I was worried about whether the strip wood would come off easily, but fortunately it did. To create a level platform for the houses, I cut some 680 GSM paper, the same size as the floor plan of each house. Cutting into the mountain is quite easy, it just makes a big mess. Then I used some of my homemade sculptor mold to build up the landscape around the platforms. If you are interested, I also have a video about how to make your own sculptor mold, link in the description. While that was drying, I cleaned up the plaster in between the rails and sleepers. I tried my best not to scratch the paint. Any remaining white plaster spots will be removed with a wash later. But first I do the dry phase. After planning and examining more reference photos, I simply sculpt the dry phase with my fingers. Next, the road crossing. Some of the ballast was in the way of the strip wood, but it can easily be removed by soaking the area with a bit of water. A gel super glue was used to glue it on. I recommend cutting the strip wood with a new sharp hobby knife blade. I tried my best to cut realistic size planks and also bend them a bit in the radius of the track. At this stage, I gave the road a dark grey coat of paint. This makes it much easier to see imperfections in the road surface. Next, I sand the whole road surface with 100 ply sandpaper. Make sure the plaster is completely dry before sanding, otherwise the sandpaper will just get blocked. I tried a few different ways to get the road texture, but ultimately I decided to go with using really fine sifted dirt. First I apply PVA glue and then some black and white paint. After mixing, I applied with an older paintbrush. I made the mixture a bit lighter than I wanted the final road color to be. This is to allow me to make it darker with washes and weathering later on. That's what's nice about this method. You don't have to get it perfect from the start. It's easy to change and fine-tune it, as you'll see. This is how the texture came out so far. I use an ink wash to dye the strip wood. This looks really dark, but don't worry, it gets lighter as it dries. While I was waiting for that to dry, I gave the rest of the plaster a brown base coat. Once dry, I used a really diluted brown oil wash to weather it even more. For painting the stripes on the road, I didn't want to use masking tape, cause I was scared it would ruin the paint on the road when removing it. So instead, I made a stencil out of paper and used a sponge to apply the paint. To be honest, I was surprised at how well this worked. I dulled down the stripes with a damp sponge. Next, I made another oil wash. This time I used it on the entire road surface. I made sure to mix it really well, because if there's a blob of paint in the wash, it's not gonna be fun. I applied it with a paintbrush. I can tell you this was scary. Because it's wet, it's also gonna be lighter as it dries. I was really happy I didn't completely ruin it at this stage, and it was looking really nice. The lines were a bit too dull after the wash, so I simply painted it again. Though I wish I used the stencil again, because painting it by hand doesn't give the best results. After some final dry brushing, I was really happy with the road and moved on to making some prefab concrete walls. I designed them in Blender and then 3D printed them. It's all starting to look like something now, but before gluing them in place, I will first do the ground texture. I collected many different types of dirt and natural materials outside. After washing it with water and letting it dry, I sifted through a mesh to separate all the rocks from the finer dirt. I really like this, it's not just a powder, it's some variation in sizes and even color. After masking the road and track, I start applying the ground texture, starting with the finest texture and then moving to the coarser textures. To glue it down, I simply spray it with soapy water to break the surface tension, then I apply a PVA glue that's diluted with water. It's about 50-50 mix between water and glue. I waited a day for this to dry and then removed the masking. Next, I painted the prefab walls. It would be ideal to use an airbrush, but painting it with a normal paintbrush is also possible. I started with a grey primer for the base concrete color. Then I weathered it by dry brushing it with brown at the bottoms where it would be dirty, and some white to bring out some of the details. Then finally an oil wash. At this stage I realized I weathered 3 of them upside down. Oops. The easiest thing I could think of to fix this is to simply paint them a different color. I only had metallic paints of this color, but some weathering powder can take away the glossiness. I also painted the foundation platforms of the houses the same concrete color. I glued one of the walls in with PVA glue and the other with super glue. They both seem to be glued in quite well. Anyway, to apply the ground texture on steep slopes like on the mountain, I apply some diluted glue first. This is just to make sure the texture stays where you applied it, so it doesn't just slide down the steep areas. Then I simply repeat the process of spraying and applying the glue. By the way, if you are interested in downloading any of these paper kits, There are a link in the description. It's also a great way to support the channel. You can also do a super thanks here on YouTube. I'm producing a video that shows how to build all 6 paper kits, and after that I'll be doing trees and static grass. But that's it for this video, thanks for watching.